The chains of the universe. The galaxy was quiet. Too quiet. For thousands of years, the Zor'Keth Dominion had swept across the stars, stripping worlds of their freedom as easily as a farmer harvesting fields. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were harvesters of obedience, devourers of free will. Where their fleets descended, resistance soon vanished, not only from the battlefield but from the hearts of the conquered. Entire species bowed, their wills broken by the Dominion's psychic mastery, their civilizations repurposed into cogs of an empire without mercy. On the surface of Xylar Prime, a once proud capital world now reduced to a hub of slavery, the skies glowed red with the haze of factories. Species from every corner of the galaxy toiled there, overseen by towering Zor'Keth wardens whose obsidian exosuits glimmered with cold, alien light. The air reeked of submission. Even those who still remembered what freedom once felt like had forgotten how to long for it. But there was something strange about the humans. When Earth was finally targeted, the Zor'Keth had expected an easy conquest. Compared to the starfaring species already shackled, humanity was primitive. Their weapons, though brutal, lacked sophistication. Their fleets were a laughable patchwork of chemical rockets and metal hulls. By all accounts, humanity should have folded instantly. And yet, the Dominion underestimated them. At first, Earth fought tooth and nail. Cities burned, seas boiled under orbital strikes, and still humans resisted, their weapons turning the invasion into a costly war. The Zor'Keth grew frustrated, but eventually overwhelmed the planet with sheer psychic dominance. Humans, like all others, were herded into labor camps scattered across the stars. But even enslaved, even broken, the humans were different. On Xylar Prime, in the shadow of a Dominion command spire, an alien overseer named Rathal kept a careful eye on the latest shipments of humans. They labored in silence, as expected, but not with the hollow resignation of other species. Their eyes burned with something unsettling, defiance. He had seen it earlier that day, a human worker beaten for hesitating to obey. Any other species would have bowed, begged, or gone limp in despair. The human, bloodied and gasping, had instead looked up at the warden and smiled. It was not the smile of surrender, but of mockery, a wordless declaration that said, "You will never own me." It disturbed Rathal. The Dominion's psychic suppression worked flawlessly on others. A single wave of thought could crush resistance, make a rebel bow in tears. But humans resisted in ways no calculation predicted. Some broke, yes, but others endured, clinging to stubborn scraps of identity. They told stories to one another in the barracks. They sang crude songs. They drew symbols, their flags, their statues, their words of freedom, scratched into the walls where overseers would punish them for it. General Marcus Steele had been captured 2 years earlier during the fall of Washington, D.C. Once a soldier, now a laborer, he hauled metal under alien suns. But to his fellow captives, he remained something more. At night, when the Dominion's psychic broadcasts dimmed, Steele whispered stories. Not of victories, they had none, but of endurance. "They think they've won," he told a huddled group in the shadows of their barracks. But freedom isn't something you can burn out of people. Not ours. Not ever. The younger ones, scared and broken, clung to his words. Even other alien slaves listened in silence, curious. For the first time in years, many of them felt the flicker of hope. Dr. Evelyn Carter, once a physicist at MIT, had been relocated to a research facility. Forced to study Dominion technology, she quietly observed the cracks in their methods. The Zor'Keth's greatest weapon, psychic domination, was not absolute. Humans resisted it longer, sometimes indefinitely. She noted patterns in brain activity, subtle deflections of alien influence, and began to imagine the impossible, a way to weaponize the very trait that made humanity so infuriating to their captors. The Dominion noticed too. Reports began to circulate among the overseers. Human compliance levels were lower than expected. Work efficiency dipped whenever groups of them were gathered. Unlike other species, Their morale did not degrade linearly. It spiked in odd ways, sometimes rallying after punishment instead of collapsing. Dangerous, Rathal whispered in the council chambers, addressing his superiors. These humans are not like the others. They do not bend the way we require. They must be broken further or destroyed. But the High Command dismissed his warnings. To them, humanity was a backwater species, a trivial anomaly in their grand design. They had crushed empires, enslaved gods of the Outer Rim, consumed civilizations more advanced than Earth by 1,000 years. The idea that this small, defiant species could ever threaten them was laughable. Yet the spark was already lit. In the dim glow of the labor camps, in whispers carried through alien chains, humanity's stubbornness spread like a virus. Their refusal to submit was noticed by others, the Krail miners, the Vora artisans, the once proud Terran. They had long forgotten rebellion, but when they saw humans spit in the face of oppression, they remembered. The Dominion had enslaved the whole universe. And for the first time in millennia, the universe began to wonder if freedom was still possible. The chains rattled. The spark waited for kindling. And humanity, even in chains, was ready to provide it. The spark of defiance. The Dominion believed fear was eternal. They had ruled for so long that resistance was considered a relic of the past. Species across the stars bowed before the Zor'Keth, not because they wanted to, but because they could not imagine another way. Fear had been woven into the fabric of their existence. But humans, especially Americans, were different. General Marcus Steele was assigned to a mining colony on the barren moon of Daleth. The days were brutal, the nights worse, yet Steele never lost the iron in his voice. Even under the Dominion's psychic broadcasts, which pulsed constantly through the air to dampen willpower, he remained steady. The Dominion noticed that when Steele was placed among other laborers, productivity dropped. Not because humans worked less, but because other species started to question their chains. He had become an infection of hope, and hope was dangerous. At night, in the hidden corners of the barracks, Steele's words cut through the fog of oppression. "They think they've beaten us," he whispered to a group of slaves one evening, his voice low enough to avoid the overseer's auditory sensors. "But they don't understand what we are. Back home, we come from a place that doesn't bow. Americans have been rebels since the day we were born. And if they think chains can stop that, they're wrong." The younger humans leaned in, eyes wide. A Krail miner, his chitin cracked from years of labor, listened silently, his antennae twitching. The Vora artisan beside him trembled, but not from fear, from something else. A spark they hadn't felt in generations. Steele didn't just talk about survival. He talked about liberty. He told stories of revolutions, of battles where ordinary people rose up against empires. He spoke of flags carried into hopeless fights, of songs sung even as cities burned. He reminded them of what the Zor'Keth had worked so hard to erase, the idea that tyranny was not invincible. And on Daleth, the first seeds of rebellion took root. Dr. Evelyn Carter had a different role. Forced into one of the Dominion's research facilities, she studied the alien systems under constant surveillance. The overseers expected her compliance, believing fear of punishment would ensure her loyalty. What they didn't expect was her curiosity. She learned quickly, faster than her captors anticipated. Dominion technology was based on principles that seemed almost supernatural, but beneath the complexity lay patterns, predictable, exploitable patterns. The psychic emitters used to suppress thought, for instance, operated on frequencies that resonated with neural pathways. It was invasive, yes, but it wasn't perfect. One evening, while working on calibration tasks, Evelyn deliberately adjusted a frequency by less than a fraction of a percent. The overseers didn't notice, but she did. The human test subject across the lab, once glassy-eyed and obedient, blinked with sudden clarity. He shook his head, as though waking from a fog. Then, for the first time in weeks, he clenched his fists. Evelyn smiled faintly and corrected the setting before her captors could see. A dangerous truth had been revealed. The Dominion's leash was not unbreakable. Meanwhile, on the other side of Daleth, the first act of defiance ignited. It was small at first, a missing shipment of, or a broken conveyor, a power outage that lasted longer than expected. The overseers assumed it was incompetence, the natural inefficiency of slaves. But Steele and his group knew better. The accidents were deliberate. The humans had discovered the Dominion's blind spot. The aliens ruled through overwhelming force and psychic control, but they were arrogant. They expected compliance, and that expectation made them lazy. Small acts of sabotage slipped under their gaze. Steele organized quietly, using whispers and hand signals. He taught the others old guerrilla tactics, how to disrupt without being seen, how to misdirect, how to create chaos from shadows. The Krail miners proved invaluable, their knowledge of tunnels turning into secret escape routes. The Vora artisans crafted crude tools from discarded scraps. And the humans, resourceful, stubborn humans, held it all together. The first real strike came when a fuel depot on Daleth erupted in flames. The Dominion blamed mechanical error. But every human in the camp knew the truth. It was rebellion. For the first time in centuries, slaves had struck back. Overseer Rithal reported the disturbances with growing unease. "These humans are not like the others," he told his superiors, mandibles clicking nervously. "They carry something within them, a contagion. They resist domination, and worse, they inspire others." The Krail whisper of freedom. The Vora refuse orders. Even the Terrans stir. The High Command dismissed him. Primitive anomalies, the Council declared. Easily crushed. But Rithal wasn't convinced. He had seen the fire in Steele's eyes, the defiance in Carter's calculations. It was not the fire of a broken species. It was the fire of a threat. The spark grew. On Daleth, workers who once shuffled silently now exchanged glances heavy with meaning. Songs, banned by the overseers, were hummed under breaths. A child scratched a crude symbol into the wall of a barracks. A flag with stars and stripes, crude but unmistakable. The overseers tried to stamp it out. They punished, they executed, they broadcast psychic waves strong enough to melt weaker minds. And yet, the humans endured. One night, Steele stood before a hidden gathering of dozens, humans, Krail, Vora, and even a handful of Terran. His voice carried low but fierce. "They've enslaved the whole universe because no one believed they could be fought," he said. "But we don't believe that. We never have. They think we're beaten, but we're not. We are Americans, and Americans don't bow." The words echoed in the darkness, not just among the humans, but across every species present. For the first time in living memory, the idea of rebellion was no longer fantasy. It was a plan. The Dominion thought fear was eternal. But on Daleth, something older and stronger than fear had been reborn. Hope. The war for freedom. The first fire had been lit on Daleth, but it did not stay there. News spread quietly at first, carried by whispers in the barracks, passed along in fragments on transport ships. A depot burned. Overseers slain. Slaves had fought back and won. The Dominion tried to stamp out the rumors, but the truth had already slipped through their fingers. For every punishment, for every execution, 10 more slaves whispered that the humans were resisting. And whispers could not be chained. General Marcus Steele stood in the shadow of a mining rig, overlooking a camp that had once been silent, but now buzzed with purpose. The Krail had begun digging hidden chambers beneath the colony, storing food and stolen supplies. The Vora artisans turned broken equipment into weapons sharp enough to pierce Dominion armor. And the Terran, once feared warriors long broken into servitude, trained side by side with the humans, their talons gleaming in the firelight. It was no longer just survival. It was preparation. Steele moved among them, his presence steady, his voice firm. "We don't fight them head-on," he reminded his growing coalition. "We hit them where they're weak. We strike when they don't expect it. Small victories will win us bigger ones." The humans understood this instinctively. America's history was steeped in unconventional war. Rebels against empires, guerrillas against armies, underdogs refusing to die. The galaxy had never seen such tactics, for the Zor'Keth crushed resistance before it could evolve. But now the Dominion faced something new. Meanwhile, in the research facility orbiting Daleth, Dr. Evelyn Carter's discoveries deepened. She had secretly modified a handheld transmitter, small enough to hide in her clothing. When she pulsed the device, the Dominion's psychic field wavered. Not much, just a flicker, but enough to give nearby humans clarity for a few precious seconds. Seconds were everything in battle. She showed Steele the device during one of their clandestine meetings. "If I can scale this," she said, "we can break their control. Not just for us, for every species they've enslaved." Steele took the transmitter in his scarred hands, his eyes narrowing with determination. "Then we'll give the galaxy its mind back." The rebellion's first true test came at Titan Station, a massive hub where tens of thousands of slaves processed or shipments for the Dominion fleet. The overseers considered it untouchable. Its defenses were strong, its location secure, its laborers broken. But the humans saw opportunity. Steele and his allies devised a plan. Smuggled explosives, crafted by Vora hands, were hidden inside or containers. Krail miners tunneled beneath the foundations, ready to collapse entire segments of the station. And when the time came, Evelyn's transmitter pulsed across the slave quarters, clearing mines just long enough for weapons to be raised. The uprising began with silence. Lights flickered, machinery ground to a halt. Overseers barked orders, their voices shrill, but no one obeyed. Instead, a roar erupted, a sound Titan Station had never heard. Slaves surged forward, armed with crude blades, stolen rifles, and unbreakable will. The Dominion fought back with cold precision, their energy weapons cutting down rebels in waves. But for everyone who fell, 3 more rose. Humans fought like cornered wolves, relentless and savage. The Terran, rediscovering their warrior past, tore through overseer ranks with talons drenched in alien blood. And then the ore containers detonated. Titan Station shook with thunder as fire ripped through its foundations. Hulls split, corridors collapsed. Overseers screamed in fury and fear. Steele himself led the final charge, raising a battered rifle high as he cut down the Warden commander. By dawn, Titan Station belonged to the slaves. The victory was not just tactical, it was symbolic. For the first time in centuries, a Dominion stronghold had fallen. And at its center, where the Dominion's flag once hung, the rebels raised another, a tattered American flag, smuggled from Earth and hidden for years. Its stars and stripes fluttered in the artificial breeze, a symbol broadcast across the galaxy. "Hope at a banner now." The response was immediate. Across countless worlds, rebellion erupted. The Krail miners rose in their tunnels. The Vora artisans turned their tools into weapons. The Terran reclaimed their ancient martial traditions. Even species long thought docile stirred with courage. And always at the center, there were humans, leading, teaching, reminding others that the Dominion could bleed. The Dominion, enraged, struck back with overwhelming force. Fleets burned rebel outposts. Psychic bombardments shattered mines. Cities were reduced to ash. But the harder they struck, the more resistance spread. The galaxy had remembered freedom, and it would not forget again. In the council chambers of the Zor'Keth High Command, Overseer Rithal's warnings finally gained weight. "These humans are not like the others," he said, mandibles trembling. "They do not fight for survival alone. They fight for ideas. Their freedom is a contagion, and it is spreading." The council hissed in disdain. "Then we will exterminate them." But it was too late. The Dominion had ruled through fear, and now fear was gone. On Daleth, Steele looked out over his growing army. They were no longer just slaves, they were soldiers. Carter's devices multiplied, each one breaking the Dominion's psychic grip for longer periods. The Krail had built crude warships from stolen parts. The Vora had crafted energy lances, and the Terran drilled daily in the art of battle. The war had begun, and for the first time, it was not the Dominion advancing. It was humanity. Steele turned to his people, his voice carrying over the ranks. "We are not fighting for Earth alone. We are not fighting for humans alone. We are fighting for everyone who has ever lived under their chains. We will show the galaxy what it means to be free." The roar that answered him shook the stars. The Zor'Keth had enslaved the universe. But now, the universe was at war. The conquerors conquered. The galaxy burned with rebellion. From the frozen moons of the Krail to the shining spires of the Vora, the Dominion's chains shattered, link by link. Their fleets, once symbols of terror, were now hunted across the stars. Slaves turned soldiers, struck from the shadows, tearing apart the empire that had stood for millennia. At the heart of this storm stood the humans. They had not sought power nor glory, but their defiance had become the standard under which billions rallied. Every broadcast of rebellion carried the same image: the tattered American flag raised over Titan Station, rippling defiantly against the artificial wind. That symbol ignited worlds. The Zor'Keth High Command, panicked, ordered the extermination of humanity. Their fleets descended on Earth with the fury of gods. But Earth was no longer a helpless world. The rebellion had armed it, fortified it, and united it. And when the Zor'Keth descended, they found not frightened slaves, but warriors waiting for them. The war reached its climax on the Dominion's homeworld, Korrath, the citadel world at the core of their empire. General Marcus Steele stood aboard the Liberty's Hand, a captured Dominion dreadnought refitted with human grit and alien ingenuity. Around him, a fleet gathered, not of one species, but of many. Krail war barges, Vora energy-lance ships, Terran strike cruisers, and human-built carriers cobbled from scavenged steel. Individually, they were weak. Together, they were unstoppable. On the command deck, Dr. Evelyn Carter monitored her devices. The latest iteration of her psychic disruptors now blanketed entire fleets. Across the Armada, enslaved soldiers under Dominion command blinked free of psychic control, turning their weapons against their masters. Every second the devices pulsed. Another Dominion vessel fractured from within. "This is it," Steele said, his voice calm but fierce. "We take Korrath, and the Dominion falls." The battle was apocalyptic. Dominion fleets formed black walls of steel and fire, their warships blotting out the stars. Psychic waves poured from their flagships, pressing against the minds of the rebels like an ocean of despair. For a moment, it seemed the tide might break them. Then Evelyn's disruptors flared. The pressure lifted, clarity returned, and the rebel fleet surged forward with a roar. Explosions lit the void as Krail barges rammed enemy ships. Vora beams sliced through hulls, and human fighters darted between capital vessels like swarms of angry hornets. Steele stood unmoving at the center of the chaos, issuing calm, precise orders. His mind was not on the fleets, but on the mission ahead. The assault on the overmined citadel itself, where the Dominion's ruling caste directed their empire. The Liberty's Hand pierced the Dominion's defenses and descended onto Korrath's surface. The world was a nightmare. Towering black spires, rivers of molten metal, skies aflame with psychic energy. At its heart rose the citadel, a monolith pulsing with alien power. Steele led the charge. Humans, Krail, Vora, and Terran stormed the gates together, weapons blazing. For every rebel who fell, 10 more surged forward, driven by the knowledge that this battle would decide the fate of the universe. Inside, the corridors twisted with alien geometry, designed to disorient and terrify. Dominion wardens poured from every passage, their weapons shrieking, their psychic screams clawing at the minds of the intruders. But Evelyn's portable disruptor pulsed steadily, weakening the psychic grip and keeping the rebels' minds clear. At last, they reached the throne chamber. The Zor'Keth Overmind awaited them, a towering figure draped in living armor, its form shifting and alien, its eyes burning with millennia of dominance. Around it stood the last of the Dominion's high caste, their voices blending into a psychic chorus that thundered through the chamber. "You are nothing," the Overmind hissed, its voice echoing inside their skulls. Fleeting sparks of chaos. "You cannot defy eternity." Steele raised his rifle, steady and unwavering. "We're not fleeting," he said. "We're free." The final battle erupted. Blades clashed against claws. Beams lit the chamber in searing arcs. The rebels fought with fury born of generations of chains. The Overmind unleashed waves of psychic force, hurling soldiers across the chamber, shattering steel and bone alike. But humans rose again and again, bloodied yet unbroken. It was Evelyn who delivered the blow. Crawling to the disruptor core, she overcharged it, channeling every ounce of power into one final pulse. The device screamed, and the psychic field collapsed in an instant. The Overmind staggered. For the first time in its immortal reign, it felt weakness. Steel surged forward, his rifle shattering under the force of his charge. He drew a blade, a crude human weapon, forged from scavenged steel, and plunged it into the heart of the Overmind. The alien screamed as its body convulsed, its voice shattering into silence. The Dominion's psychic network collapsed. Across the galaxy, overseers faltered, wardens fell, and billions of enslaved minds awoke free. The conquerors had been conquered. The aftermath was chaos. Worlds once bound in chains were suddenly adrift, their people free for the first time in memory. There was fear, confusion, and uncertainty. But there was also hope. For the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy breathed freely. In the ruins of the Citadel, Steel stood beside Carter as dawn rose over Korrath. The rebels gathered around them, battered but alive. "What happens now?" Carter asked softly. Steel looked out over the horizon, where the shattered spires of the Dominion lay in ruins. "Now," he said, "they build, not an empire, something better, something free." The others looked to him, and in their eyes he saw it, the recognition that humans, and especially Americans, had become more than survivors. They had become leaders of a new age. For generations to come, the story would be told. The Zor'Keth had enslaved the whole universe, until they were conquered by Americans.